Hey, this is Jeremy Hahn, creator of Image Comics, The Realm, and The Beauty. I'm here with Southern Fried Geekery Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Southern Fried Geekery Podcast. As always, I am Caleb Alexander McKenzie.
Matt Trogdon. And I'm Craig Lance.
And I'm giddy. I've been waiting for this, well, since we tried it the first time, and it just, didn't work as well as it should have. But thanks to, the silver lining of Corona is that we are recording remotely, and we have the opportunity and the ability to reach out and kind of grab some of our friends off the vine because they're ripe for the conversation, and we get to throw them in the mix with us. And I'm pleased beyond measure to be joined on this podcast today by none other than Mr. Bill Zanowitz.
Hey everybody, how you doing?
Great, man. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I'm excited. So Bill, for a lot of our listeners, they know who you are. A lot of us kind of move in the same concentric circles. But for anybody who doesn't know who you might be, why don't you go ahead and tell them a little bit about yourself?
Sure thing. I am Bill Zanowitz. I am the founder and host of the Comic Book Bears podcast, which is a group of hairy, heavy homos that talk about comics. But I swear, folks, you don't have to be a hairy, heavy homo to listen in. And I've been a comics fan since 1973. I am old as sand. Somehow I became an inspiration for Caleb to go to law school. Please don't pin that on me, folks.
So I got to know Bill through the 11 O'Clock Comics kind of Facebook forum online chat. We've been really good friends ever since, and for me personally, finding other gay geeks, so to speak, other gay comic nerds has been a big influence. I know, Craig and I have had this conversation over the last couple of years. You walk into a comic shop and a lot of times it's filled with the same, kind of the same demographic. And so for somebody who like me might appear to be of that demographic from the outside, but isn't, it was a pleasing experience to make friends like Matt and who owns Kapow Comics over in Sherwood, and of course Craig, who's been like my bestie for years, but also our little Matt, Jerry, Sean, who was on that comic, who used to be on the show, having all those guys kind of just there, and the ability to make friends outside of the straight white dude world was nice. But to get online and find that there are other queer people, especially like Bill said, the hairy, heavy homos, even though I don't fit the hairy demographic. I'm just a little chubby. But it's been great, and he really has become a mentor, so to speak, to me in the world of podcasting and, comics knowledge and yes, even in the world of trying to be a lawyer. I make the joke about having a sticky note that just says "Be Bill" on my desk.
Well, Bill's one of those, he's a little bit opposite of you in that you're a Marvel zombie and he's more of a DC zombie. Isn't that right, Bill?
Yeah. If you go to a website called Mike's Amazing World of DC Comics, and don't do it right now because then you're just going to be, completely enraptured by it and won't be paying attention to recording. But it's a really infectious website. And one of their downloads that they have is an Excel spreadsheet with every DC comic that was published between 1935 and 2012.
Wow.
And like I said, I'm old as sand. And when I went into that spreadsheet and logged what I owned, it's over half of all the comics DC published.
Wow,
here.
Nice.
Not the valuable half, but half.
Well,
so yeah, I read everything DC that comes out, apart from some of the creator-owned materials or Looney Tunes. I mean, there's a few exceptions, but.
So, have you seen that collection that's going up for sale?
Yeah, and I gotta say,
for auction.
I actually knew the guy whose collection it is, Ian Levine. I knew the name more from record collecting circles. He was somebody that was very influential in both Northern soul and high energy soul music. And in the bios, you would always see like he has every DC comic ever published. I thought that was such bullshit. you know, and
Right.
it turns out he did.
Yeah, this guy's got everything ever
Yeah.
up through now that DC's published, and he's actually auctioning it all off.
Well,
It's
Yeah.
insane.
and this is
I mean,
kind of
I don't know how much money it's going to cost to buy that, but I know I don't have that kind of money.
this is kind of the second time that's happened the last couple of years. I think, was it last year? I mean, it may have been earlier this year. February was 17 years long, but somebody sold off every Marvel comic. Like they had that kind of that same thing with a Marvel
Mhm.
collection. So it's interesting how both of those things have kind of popped up and happened in
Yeah.
the last, the relatively recent history of comics. And I wonder if we're going to start seeing more and more of that as some of the
Yeah, I don't know how many people have, first of all, the financial wherewithal, and second, just have lived long enough to
Right.
have achieved something like that. I imagine you will see substantial collections as boomers
As their children
trail
get
off.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but in terms of completeness, I don't think there's too many people in the world that. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine there are like smaller publishers. Like I'm sure there's somebody alive that has every Charlton comic, say.
Right.
Yeah,
But
things like
yeah,
that.
DC or Marvel, that's just insane.
But especially with when you consider variants and you consider print runs of 50 copies, I just can't conceive
Right.
of it
right.
too much these days. Yeah.
Well, I think we know some people that have every issue that was ever published by Boundless Comics.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
some of those pages are stuck together, so
Yeah.
the value is diminished. you might say.
Greatly.
Yeah.
Speaking of printing, kind of the big news in comics publishing. Before we get to talk about comics, if we can go on a tangent here for just a second, kind of big news came out in comics world this week, and I was going to see what you guys had kind of thought about it. We've spoken a little bit about it, but not really in depth. It was announced today, this past week through DC that they're going to start shipping comics again. And the way that they're going to do that is there are essentially two new publishers, not publishers, two new distributors that are popping up out of this. And they each have their own name. One of them's Lunar or Luna, the other one's something CS. But
UCS.
essentially what it is, yeah. It's Midtown Comics, who's going to handle kind of East Coast distribution, and if I got that right, it's DCBS, Discount Comic Book Service, who's going to be handling distribution on the West Coast, which in a way, and we don't know how this is going to work out long term, but at least at the time, it breaks Diamond's stranglehold on the distribution rights for the industry, and I'm curious about what you guys think about this.
Well, I think it gives DC, that legal, like you said, it's a legal in to break that stranglehold, to break that contract, because of the fact that Diamond is not following through on their, through no fault of their own, but they're not following through on the conditions of their contract to distribute it if they have it to distribute. So from that standpoint, it's interesting to me. And as far as getting comics in our hands again, I'm always excited about that.
Yeah. Well, from a legal... go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, go ahead. No, you introduced the legal, and then I'll probably argue with you.
Okay, from the legal perspective, and Craig is right. Like it's through no fault of their own, but it can also be argued other distributors for books even haven't shut down. So Diamond didn't have to close up shop. There are two kind of legal concepts, at least from my little first year baby lawyer brain, that I can think of that would allow them to either side of this argument to kind of not get or not be liable for damages for breaching the contract, and that's impossibility and impracticability. Diamond can argue that it was impractical for them to continue to meet the standards of their contract at the moment, but they planned on doing it, and so they could potentially sue, DC or anybody else for breach. But also DC could come back and say, hey, like you shut down, so it was impossible for us to get our product in the hands of customers because of your actions. So you breached the contract, and therefore we were, we had every right to go outside that system. And so I'm curious to see how it would work out from a legal perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit exactly on what would be the defenses that Diamond would, if there ever was a lawsuit, that they would assert. But again, these are extreme circumstances, unprecedented times, and I think people are providing too much weight to this move. It appears to me that this is a temporary fix. It shouldn't be viewed as anything but a temporary fix. I think out of the publishers, certainly Marvel and possibly Dark Horse, could engage in setting up a system like this with we're actually two of Diamond's biggest customers. It's also interesting that it's a very limited number of titles that are coming out, and a lot of speculation has gone on about the next issue of Batman, of which apparently was a fairly big print run of 230,000 copies, all of which are in Diamond's warehouses right now. So I would not be surprised if Diamond is a participant in this in some capacity. So I don't really see this as the death knell for Diamond. I would like to see, a comic book distribution landscape where there isn't a monopoly. But I also think people don't remember like how shitty Heroes World distribution was. And I'm also surprised with comics fans about how little some people know about the business, but that doesn't stop them commenting at all.
Well, welcome to 2020 on the internet.
I was going to say, yeah.
But I do think it's a temporary fix. Could this lead to something where there isn't the stranglehold that Diamond has on the industry? Possibly. But if that is the case, it's in very embryonic stages. And I'm glad that books are going to get into the hands of retailers and eventually readers. I think a lot of retailers have been innovative in how they've tried to stay afloat in this time, and having product that is new product, I think, will be a tremendous boon to that. It's an interesting development, but I don't see it as anything but a temporary development.
I think you are probably 100% right.
Yeah.
I think yes. I would. Would I like to see? I think it's meant to be a temporary development, but with as with all things, once you open the window's open. You can't put toothpaste back into the tube, so to speak. So what I would hope is that it going forward. I have no doubt that Diamond is going to continue to be the driving distributor because, look, they're already set up and they do have a monopoly. All the comic shops who get new comics already work off the Diamond portal system. So it's not like they're going to just dry up and disappear unless something happens and they just go belly up from a business perspective. I don't think that's going to happen. But somebody put it really, and I didn't even know this, but they reminded the world that Diamond started out as a retailer, and so did a lot of your distributors. And these two retailers that are starting this, Midtown Comics and DCBS, they're not just retailers. They are number one, number two on the people who sell, and they have a large distribution footprint already because they are the two companies that already ship massively across America and across the world even. I think Bill, you're a DCBS customer
Since 2010, yes.
Yeah, and so they really are the local comic shop for anybody who doesn't live in a city that has a comic shop. I grew up, and I've told this story a couple dozen times. I grew up out in the country, and the closest comic book shop to me at the time was an hour away, and I only got to start going whenever I took trips to the dentist as a kid. And actually, I didn't even go to the comic shop. I went to a Walden Books in the mall where my mother would leave me because she was entirely too trusting that nobody wanted me. And so she was
Different times, man. Different times.
I mean, I think she was rolling the dice a little bit, but that's just neither here nor there. No, I'm joking, obviously, but and so you have those moments. And what's been interesting to me, aside from the mechanics of all this, are kind of the number of people who, and I think Bill hit on this a little bit when he said people talking about things they don't know about, who just came out vehemently against it. Against this, even from a temporary perspective, against this move. And you have some shop owners who have decided that since their shop is closed, that all the other shops in the continental U.S. should be closed. That no one should be able to sell product if they can't sell product. And then you also have some that, and not being a shop owner, I knew there was a little animosity between the brick and mortar shops and like discount comic book service, but I didn't realize the extent to which that animosity ran, how deep it was. They loathe the idea that discount comic book service exists, number one, and that it could be a distributor, for the simple fact that they see it as a mainline competitor. And I don't understand that, because DCBS reaches out and grabs a customer base that number one, the local comic shops can't, because just the constraints of being a local comic shop and kind of the neighborhood that you're in, but also that local comic shops have largely ignored and gone out of their way to ignore for about 15 to 20 years.
Yeah. Just for some background perspective, unlike you, Caleb, I've had comic books all around me my entire life. Like, I've never had, a situation like that. Yours was an hour away. Mine was down the street to the newsstand, when I grew up. And, even now I can think of at least 5 that, if they were open, would be within a 20-minute drive from where I am. But I do think I can tell you what I had my local comic, the whole thing behind the DCBS, my local comic shop closed up shop because most of the profits went up the owner's nose. And
nice.
Yeah. Always happens.
Hard to stay in business when you're snorting it.
Yeah,
Man, that rock and roll comic book store owner life will catch up with you.
Yeah. Someone should do a podcast about that, Bowen statues and cocaine. But so my LCS went belly up, and when I was looking for whatever new one, because it's almost like dating, where are you going to get like your biggest discounts? Nobody could land the discounts that DCBS did. Nobody could. And plus, there was also this comfort level of like, okay, I don't have to go every week. I don't have to worry about something that, I didn't order that, because of their ordering system. I just think that many of the local shops, just weren't as aggressive on that front. I think, some probably can't be because of their relatively small size.
Right.
But I think if it was a situation where I could get a DCBS level discounts at a local shop, absolutely, I would absolutely. And I still maintain a very small pull list at one of the local shops, Main Street Comics, because I think it's important to have that kind of foothold, even if it's very small in my case.
Well, to go back to, sorry, Craig, real quick, to go back to Caleb's initial point about being an hour or so away from a comic book shop, so it's the only time you got to access them. Diamond's the reason that problem exists, because before Diamond had this exclusivity, you could see a comic book at any given grocery store you walked into throughout the country, or any given pharmacy you walked into throughout the country.
I think that's absolutely correct.
It is absolutely correct. Yeah.
But that was also just that was basically an industry shift that I don't think was necessarily Diamond's fault. And it's perplexing to me now that there's only 3 comic publishers that have any footprint in newsstand distribution, being Archie, Dark Horse, and Bongo. That really surprises me that they wouldn't even have some 2 or 3 major titles that at least go out to newsstand sales.
Well, you
But
can't. I mean, they talk about Mad Magazine going under. You couldn't find it in a comic book. You couldn't find it in a grocery store anymore. That's where I bought all of mine growing up.
Mhm.
And it was just gone. It affects the industry in multiple levels when you change it to that degree.
Well, I think that speaks to why the biggest selling comics generally are outside of the direct market. I mean, I think if you look at any spreadsheet right now, the most sold comics are Captain Underpants and the Raina Telgemeier books.
That's fake news, according to our LCS.
Well, and
I'm playing, of course.
No, I mean, because it doesn't come through Diamond, they can't get it, so they don't profit off of it. So I get that. I get being salty from it. The flip side, and it go back to a culmination of the things we talked about. I drive past now 3 comic book shops to get to Kapow, our local comic book shop. When I moved to Little Rock and was searching around to find an LCS to use to set up a pull list and stuff, I tried all the other ones because they're closer to my house. I mean, I don't love comics so much that I really enjoy wasting gas.
Right.
So, but those other, I walk into those other shops and, one of them didn't exist at the time. So I want to be fair on that point, but it's either dirty or grimy, looks like somebody's grandma's basement, or you sit there and you listen to the conversations and, being had by older, straight white men that make it really clear that they are not interested in the lives, opinions, or kind of the existence of people who aren't older, straight white men. And you walk in, you hear those conversations being had in hushed tones, and they don't. Like I said, I'm kind of a rednecky white dude. I don't walk into a room and everybody's like, "Hey, look, there's a homo." I'm not that person. But when you walk in and they assume that you're kind of just like them, they feel very comfortable in saying things. And our buddy Mike Nelson says the same thing. People get a little too comfortable. They say things, and you hear that, and so you buy a $3 comic and you walk out. You don't ever go back.
Right.
I got really lucky in finding Kapow because, again, I walked in and I look over in the corner and Craig is sitting there with like a halo around him, like something majestic.
I don't think that was the case at all.
But I got really lucky in finding a comic shop that was very accepting. I remember being very nervous when I don't know why, when I told the guys, hey, I'm a gay dude, which I said that so they wouldn't, because I didn't feel like hearing the gay jokes that
Still the funniest moment in Kapow history when Caleb came out. Caleb says that, and then Mike Nelson says, "Well, I'm black."
Yeah, and so if it hadn't have been for that experience, though, I would have straight up just went right to Discount Comic Book Service, because if I can't have the community, which is my biggest part, it's why we do podcasts, right? We like building geek culture communities. If I couldn't have had one that accepted me, I would have absolutely gone with saving my wallet. Now I support Kapow and I support the comic shops that do that because I think it's valuable in that aspect, and so I don't mind paying a little bit more to build that. So anyway, that was a long tangent. I was just curious about what you guys thought about it. It's always we rarely get into those like the meat and potatoes of the industry conversations on the show.
Getting comic books back in the hands of the fans is not a bad thing.
No.
However, it has to happen. So,
but it also has to happen sensibly.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, and one of the most annoying things is, I don't know why. One of our friends said this far more eloquently than I can, Caleb, but the amount of bandwidth that certain news sites provide to Brian Hibbs.
Yeah.
My God, and he's one of these retailers. If people listening don't know who he is, he's one of these retailers who is very well spoken, but it's his way or the highway, and it's draining. And I just, I would say he's a retailer that has cultivated a community pretty well, but God, I wouldn't want to be part of that.
I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna caveat it with saying I have no idea what Brian Hibbs' personal like politics are, but when Brian Hibbs talks about things like this, it comes off as kind of this very weird libertarian mindset of "fuck you" unless I can get mine.
Yeah.
And that's
I mean,
essentially what his viewpoint on most things are.
yeah. In no way were these actions DC inciting shops to reopen. In
Right.
no way.
Right.
Yeah.
It was just like shops are open and they're asking. The shops that are open are asking for something, anything.
Yeah.
It's small business owners who work on a razor thin margin, and at some point their back issue catalog is going to run out. They need something to bring customers in to justify them staying open if they can, and for them not to go bankrupt. And you can't get mad at them for looking for whatever avenue they can for that.
That's right.
It's not. It goes beyond just the four walls of that comic shops. These are these men and women's livelihood. It's how they feed their family and pay their mortgages and their rent and their bills. I mean, it's their
Well, and all the way to
bread and butter.
all the way to the creators of the comics that are not working right now. So it's it's affecting a lot of people, as this virus is doing for everybody around the world. So if you can get back to business and do it safely and reasonably, then go for it.
Right. Safely and reasonably being the key words there. I mean, I'm
Absolutely.
still a big fan of the world staying shut down for a little bit because I don't want a resurgence. Like if you're going to the beach right now, fuck off.
I agree.
So unless you're going to, stay 6 feet away from everybody on the beach, which I'm cool with. Actually, if we can make that beach etiquette, I'd probably go to the beach more.
Well, I'm against all beaches.
It's not like you guys like we have a lot of choices in Central Arkansas for the beach.
Got a truckload of sand and a kiddie pool coming Monday. All right, well, let's talk about some comics. How about that?
Okay.
That's what we're all here for. Everybody's like enticed to hear Bill wax poetic about a book that he read this week. So we'll start with him. Bill, what'd you read this week, buddy?
Okay, well, there are 2 books I want to talk about, but they are short stories in effectively anthology books. So in the math, I'll say this is one. I know Craig and Caleb. I was ready to say Cable again. Jesus.
I've called them that before.
Yeah. I know you guys, as Facebook friends, see that not since the sequestration started, but for about 2 weeks, I've been posting what comic books I read every day. And I have, though I have as many DC books that I've established, that doesn't mean I read them all. So
for sure.
So I'm whittling the enormous stack down. And
nice.
Before these are 2 books that naturally are available. No, actually, one is only available digitally at this point. The other one, it is available at retail, but not in a digital fashion. The first book I want to talk about is DC's Crimes of Passion, which was their sort of noir Valentine's Day 80-page offering this year. And I assume that some of the creators that are in here I've never heard of before, that they may be graduates of the DC's Writing and Artist program that they've had for a few years that has never accepted me. And one writer that, I'm sorry, he just does not connect with me is Steve Orlando. He just does not. I just don't see what the raves are about. It's like, he got to write Midnighter, but it doesn't mean he's a great Midnighter writer.
He's been very hit or miss with me. Yeah.
He actually has the standout story in this. It's a Batman story called More Than Maybe with artist Greg Smallwood, and its center figure is not so much Batman, but Batman's first girlfriend, Julie Madison, from the very early issues of Detective Comics. Julie Madison was also the love interest in the first film serial, the 15-chapter serials, and I think for Batman that would have been 1943. Nice. And there's a couple of allusions to the serials as well in this story. It's 10 pages long, but it's this really touching exploration of what Bruce Wayne gives up in order to be what he thinks he needs to be. And it especially for to serve as a love letter for a forgotten character like Julie Madison, it's wonderful, really good, touching story. And it's the lead-off story in DC's Crimes of Passion. And then the other story that I wanted to highlight from another anthology is from Wonder Woman Giant #3. The Giant program initially started as Walmart exclusives, and now there is the Walmart mass market editions and also versions that are published through the direct market.
Just real quick, are you collecting both covers?
Okay, here we go. I did for the Crisis books, the 2 Crisis books.
Right.
I have books on order through DCBS, but I didn't wait, and I ended up getting the Walmart versions because you can right now. Seriously, since March 13th, apart from what came in the DCBS box, the post-April books I have are all the Walmart Giants, and this is how hard up I am for new comics. Betty and Veronica Jumbo Comics Digest number 282.
Hey, those are some quality stories.
There are still
some of them
comics being published. You just have to do your research. But this was actually pre-shutdown, and there's a story in here. Oh, do I have the wrong issue? No, it's number 4. Sorry. So it might still be available at Walmart. Wonder Woman Giant number 4, and there's a backup story in here where they introduce. Oh, Jesus, I have to find. Oh no, it's the lead story. Sorry, I'm so sorry about this. It's written by Jimmy Palmiotti and Amanda Connor. You know, Comicdom's probably the favorite married couple apart from the Simonsons, and it's a story named Hope Springs Eternal with pencils by Daniel Sempere. There is a villain of note in there, but they're kind of ancillary to the story. And this book, the Giant series, it's questionable where exactly these books fall into continuity, but it kind of doesn't matter. They're just, they just stand on their own. Yeah. And in this book, they introduce a heroine named the Socialite. And what we have here in a flashback, if you can accept the references in the story, apparently Wonder Woman was active in the late 60s and early 70s as a superhero. And one of her compatriots was this character named the Socialite, who is, cut from, the Twiggy mold of, pre-supermodels from the late 60s in Britain. Mm-hmm. And she, this is the first words out of her mouth after the initial criminal has been vanquished. Wendy, some tea at the Ritz after this? And she actually becomes friends with Wonder Woman because this Socialite is so different from Diana. And we move forward to the current day, and unfortunately the Socialite is dying of cancer. Yeah. And what could be just a real throw-off story with a prominent Batman villain in the mix for Giant actually introduces, from my perspective, a character that might have some legs. And I can't think of many others that are like her. Maybe Emma Frost is there with that darling sort of mentality, but a really unexpected joy from an unlikely source, being one of the Walmart Giant books. So that's Wonder Woman number 4. And you can find it at Walmart, but don't go out for the book. If you're going to pick up water, do it then. Just pick it up. I stress to people, don't go out for comics just to do that.
It's always fun when you find those hidden gems in books where you don't really expect them.
Yeah. And again, with my trying to get through the huge DC pile, some of the most enjoyable stories have been in these short 8 to 10 page stories in the anthologies.
Nice.
That's what I love about.
So those are the 2 I want to talk about. Yeah.
You can come to my house and read through the 40,000 comics that I haven't read.
So it's funny you talk about where he called her 1D. I'm not reading those. I actually did read Orlando's brief stint on the actual main Wonder Woman title, and he had a character call her 1D in that as well, which I remember reading that and going, huh, that's a choice. So, but it was just funny because it's very lighthearted. It shows a personal connection.
That's a choice.
It reminded me a little bit, at least the character in that, the way that they presented, reminded me of Patsy from Bill, help me out here.
Ab
Fab, yeah, absolutely. Fabulous.
Absolutely fab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reminded me of that character.
Yeah.
So. Nice.
Oh, yeah, I could totally see Joanna Lumley, circa New Avengers in the 70s playing this part.
Yes.
I can absolutely see it.
Yeah. Actually, I actually like Orlando. He's been a writer that I've been on the more happy side with than not, and
yeah.
I loved his Midnight Run, but I realize it's not for me.
I tend to like his creator-owned stuff a bit more, but yeah, hit or miss for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, no biggie. It's weird. I'm the exact
awkward science.
No. I'm the exact opposite because I actually have been more inclined to enjoy his like work for hire stuff. Again, with Midnighter Apollo, his Wonder Woman stuff. He put out a book from I want to say Image that I think we even spoke about it on the show. It was like a kind of a post-apocalyptic thing with giant robots that weren't really like shown in action and stuff. That I didn't really care for that one.
Dead Kings.
Yeah, Dead Kings.
Yeah.
And then like I appreciate that he does try to inject some bit of queer culture into everything that he writes because it is from he's an outspoken bisexual, and like he is somebody that I think rightly points out that bisexuality is not just like a pit stop on the road to Gayville. That it is a real thing. Like bi erasure is something that actually happens, and so I enjoy that he points out that no, like there are real like very long term happy in who they are functioning bisexuals that have relationships with people of other genders. So and even if the story might not be there, he gets a lot of leeway from me on that aspect, I think.
Yeah, one thing I do want to say though, and I didn't mean to attack Orlando, and it's interesting when you were talking about like you prefer almost the big two works that he does more than the creator owned. For me, like I love Jeff Lemire playing in the DC or Marvel universe far more than his own stuff, and his own stuff's pretty damn good. But I do think we are at a time where there are very few hacks as writers right now. There are writers that I don't enjoy. I don't enjoy Charles Soule. I don't enjoy Alice Cott. I just don't connect with their work.
Alice Cott is somebody that I think I want to enjoy.
Yeah.
But I never quite do.
But, I think they've all proven that they have a body of work that, hey, it's not right for me, but it doesn't come from a crass perspective.
Absolutely.
There were I can't really think of too many writing hacks right now that are active in the industry with a fairly big profile, which is, I think, always healthy.
Can think of one, but I'm not going to say it because I won't be able to throw things at me. Well, Matt,
is it any weirder than your perceptions of grunge?
No, my perceptions of grunge are just correct.
No, you weren't there, honey.
That's a valid point. I was not there. That's true. There's a whole rabbit hole I could go down on grunge.
Yeah, let's not. That's a whole other show.
Why don't we go to Matt with this next one, buddy? What have you been reading this week?
Going back into my collection, I'm revisiting some old books that I've had for years and years. And one era that the more time that goes by, the more fascinated I get with this era is the 90s comic book era, specifically the Image 90s. And all the books that I bought during that time, that's completely unjustifiable. So, I revisited one of these with that in mind. And since it's my turn to talk, now the rest of you are going to as well. So this one is from Image Comics, from the Top Cow production studio. This is Witchblade #1, 1995. I'm sure everybody has this one. Everybody has Witchblade #1 from 1995, I assume.
I probably do have it, actually.
I just got it digitally from Humble Bundle, but that's a hole. I have certain holes in a lot of the Top Cow stuff, like Witchblade and the Darkness are in that hole.
Yeah. Well,
Witchblade and the Darkness were my two favorite titles from that era. #1 because they were just dynamic and cool to look at, but also a little bit sexy. My parents, who are very religious and to the point of fundamentalism, found them and did not enjoy what was being depicted, especially with the demons and whatnot, and disposed of them, sadly.
Oh, wow. Well, dynamic and sexy was the business model of Image Comics, actually.
It was.
That was the extent of their content, I'd say, with 90% of their books. So opening up this book, the first thing I noticed is, as a reflection of the money fountain that this was at the time, the enormous amount of people that were involved in making this one debut comic book. 7 different creators are involved with the creation of this book, and that is not including the editorial team.
Wow.
Yeah. Michael Turner did the pencils and the co-plot. David Wohl and Brian Haberlin both did the co-plot. David Wohl did the script. So you've got that many people doing plots, co-plots, the actual script, and then the pencils. You've got 3 different colorists. You've got the letterer. Lynn Wein is actually the editor on this book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
He should have edited that cover a little bit.
Yeah. This.
I'm not sure how her back's not broken in that position.
Oh man, well, I haven't even gotten started yet. So anyway, to quickly run through this book, it opens with the typical 90s villain, 90s comic book villain. He is an evil billionaire bachelor, too busy doing evil capitalist deeds for personal relationships. And his name is Kenneth Irons. So you can obviously assume that he's British. Given that he is filthy rich and, of course, evil to the core, he has a huge collection of ancient wartime relics. And we see him strolling through his New York apartment. Of course, it's a New York apartment, amongst his nefarious collection and talking to one of his items, which is concealed beneath a cloth drape. Quote, "I will find the one who can wield you, and then you will both be mine." End quote. Next, we cut to a very 90s comic book looking woman, tall, lean, busty, white, and scantily clad. But before you judge her on her low morals, you should know she only dresses this way to infiltrate a criminal group whom the leader is responsible for killing her childhood friend. The criminal recently escaped justice because he had, quote, enough cash to walk, end quote. She uses her sexual wiles and street smarts to pose as a potential buyer of, quote, horse, unquote. The dealer has his doubts that she is an authentic buyer and asks her to kill one of his associates to prove that she has the criminal bona fides. She feigns that she's going to shoot the chosen reprobate, but pistol whips him instead as she launches into her very sexy but deadly aerial assault. She's jumping through the air, doing somersaults, shooting her snub-nosed gun. Saying that it unleashes fireballs of justice as it tears into criminals' limbs. Just as she is about to deliver the death blow to the gang leader, police burst through the door and order everyone to freeze. We then find out that she's actually a police detective named Sarah Pizzini, out for a personal vendetta. So, of course, we see her next. The chief of police is reading her the riot act for her reckless ways as of late. During this conversation, we find out that the man she pistol whipped was actually her partner, whom was working undercover. He has recovered nicely from her assault, And of course, there are no hard feelings. Through some overly aggressive, rights-violating interrogation of an informant that was hauled in, Sarah finds out that the leader of the gang was going to do this deal so he could purchase entry to a secret criminal event at the Hotel Rialto. So intrigued is she that she decides to attend, obviously. She sneaks into the event under the guise that she is a prostitute, of course. And we find out that the whole point of the event is so people can jam their hand into the Witchblade. Witchblade is a metal or metal bone looking glove gauntlet thing. One obvious mafioso type sticks his hand in first, only to have it explode in a bloody, fiery mess. He obviously is not the chosen one. Then Sarah partners with an unexpected. Sarah's partner makes an unexpected appearance and is captured. Kenneth E. Irons is not happy as cop has showed up and uninvited and orders him executed in front of the crowd. Kind of confusing why you do that with so many witnesses, whatever. But Sarah is not at all about that, so she throws herself in front of the rain of bullets, and she and her partner are mortally wounded. As she lies dying, quote, "It can't end like this. I haven't been a hero yet," unquote. And she reaches out for the Witchblade. The Witchblade accepts her, and she is brought back to life in glorious fashion. She then kills everybody in her immediate perimeter as her internal monologues about the awesome power of it all, during which, for some reason, she calls herself insane. The book ends with Kenneth Irons taking his leave as he welcomes the Witchblade back. Then Sarah's partner dies, and his last words are asking her if she thinks he's good looking.
All right. I'm not sure what to say about all that, Matt.
Yeah, I'll tell you what you can say. 90s, baby.
90s, baby.
Here's my thoughts on that. I absolutely love listening, and just goes straight to Matt. Love listening to Matt talk about these comic books from the 90s because he's being sarcastic and he's being funny about it, but dude, you genuinely love them. And to me, that's exactly the way you should talk about these comics, because so many people who are like, they relish in the 90s, this kind of early stuff. You either have people who hate them and just won't give them the time of day, or people who think that they're precious and beloved and can't be smirched in any way. You genuinely love these books, but you are not afraid to talk about them with the level of irreverence that they display. And I think that is what I love hearing you talk about these books, because that's what it is, right? It is sexy and ridiculous and out there
and cheesecake.
Yeah.
That's what it was intended to be.
The 90s, these 90s era comics to me are the unintentionally bad movies that everybody likes to watch.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mystery Science 3000, is an amazing experience. And we would not have that side-splitting show if it weren't for the movies that were available, those movies being made. I'll never sell these comics. I'll never get rid of them. These are a part of my life that I'll never let myself forget for several reasons.
Well, I know who to put all of mine into my will for.
All of us just mentally set aside a long box for Matt.
I mean, these things are and I forget just how text heavy some of these 90 comics were. I mean, I've gone back and looked in some of the old Youngblood that I have. My God.
See, that surprises me, because I just remember there were some books like Cyberforce that you could read in 2 minutes.
Now, Cyberforce was that Top Cow production Top Cow productions were not nearly as text heavy.
Yeah.
But if you go into Extreme or Awesome Studios, that's what I thought call them, text heavy mothers. My God. I mean, you really got to do a carb load before you read those damn things. What's it now? And again, going back to this energy wave of 90s comics, Witchblade went on to have 185 issues from its original run, from 95 to 2015. Witchblade spawned not only a television movie in 2000 from TNT, it also spawned a TNT series for 2 seasons in 2001.
I own that.
I would assume that you do.
Yeah.
You keep that where people can't see it, I assume.
It's locked up in the safe. I'll send it your way. It's fun. It's 90. It is. It's early 2000s. Bad graphics. Completely riffing off of like a bad Law and Order plot, but it's fun. It's so fun.
Yeah. The one thing when I was reading this, something was like below the surface, like, okay, something's wrong about this book. I finally figured out there are only white people in this book. There are only white people in this book.
Mm-hmm.
And how that slipped past editorial, I would like to know. Yeah, man, it's
the same way that there are only white people in Friends. Even though it's in the heart of Manhattan.
And this is. Yeah, the Friends show is what I thought about when I realized that. I'm like, okay, this is Friends. This is why Friends happened. And there's a lot of reasons that the Friends show shouldn't have happened.
I said that I love the Friends show. Like it's mindless.
God damn it,
Phoebe.
Oh boy, is it ever mindless? It's not. It wasn't so mindless as it was mind numbing to me. Yeah.
So everybody kind of has their 90s image revolution artist. Mine is, I've made it no secret, mine is Silvestri. I think he's probably one of the most talented people from that era. Curious who yours is, kind of around the table.
So mine, if you'd have asked me during the 90s, my answer would have been Todd McFarlane, without a close second.
Mm-hmm.
But upon reflection, Mark Silvestri, I think, is the most well-rounded and talented artist.
Yeah, make that 3 for Silvestri.
I'm breaking it up, McFarlane.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, of course, Todd McFarlane didn't keep working after a while, but I was a diehard Todd McFarlane fan before and after the Image launch, no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
Also, don't think Portasio gets enough credit out of that group. He was somebody. I still.
That's justifiable.
I like Wils's stuff. It doesn't hurt my eyes, and I get that it does other people. But again, I think that he was trying to do things there that maybe
he's trying.
Succeeded in doing them, but he took the chance. So, nice. What you been up to, Craig? How you doing over there, buddy?
I'm doing good. So, I read. It's funny to me how we all take a different approach to these times with no new comics coming out. Matt's going back and digging deep. I've been looking for trades to read that I haven't read, and mostly independent stuff. And I stumbled across one this week called Werewolves of Mont, Pellier from Fantagraphics Publishing. And it's written by, drawn by, and everything by a man named Jason. Well, I did some research. His real name is John Arne Satteroy, but he goes by Jason for publishing all of his books. The characters in this book are all, and I'm going to butcher this word, I always butcher it, but they're all anthropomorphic. And when you combine that with this 8-panel comic strip type layout, it gives it a very childlike feel, but this book is anything but childlike. This book tells the story of Savin. How do you say that name? Somebody pronounce that name.
With an E at the end?
No, it's Sven.
Oh, Sven.
Yeah, Sven.
Sven. Okay. He was ended up in Montpellier, France, and while his day job is an artist, he spends every full moon disguising himself as a werewolf and breaking into people's homes. It doesn't take long. It doesn't take much for him to disguise himself since he is already a dog. All he does is put on a big nose, and he wears torn pants with no shirt. And instead of wearing shoes, he wears shoes that look like wolf's feet. So basically just his feet in wolf-shaped feet shoes. Yeah, it's weird.
Fucking cosplayers.
Yeah, he basically dresses up as himself with torn pants and goes out and robs people. His best friend lives across the hall. Audrey, who is a Breakfast at Tiffany fanatic, and shows up the next day to tell him he had been photographed as the werewolf, and ask him why he does that. And he says, well, if I dress up as a werewolf and somebody walks in on me, it gives me an extra couple minutes to escape, because, a werewolf's gonna, off-put some people. And she goes, well, what if they take a picture of you? And he says, well, I didn't really think it through. So he spends the next month playing cards with Audrey and her girlfriend, and playing chess in the park with one of his other friends. And I sent you guys pictures of the panels from this chess game, where there's some very sexist comments made by his friend about how all he does is spend his day looking at women's body parts. And he tells Savin that the escalators are the best place to look at them because of your eye level. This was very cringeworthy to me, and I was really concerned because of, where's this story going? But then later in the book, Savin goes to get on a escalator and decides not to, because he's not going to, fall into this same viewing as his friend. So it was kind of just a way to show that even though he's a thief, he's not a bad guy. So Audrey and her girlfriend invite Savin to a party at their house. Audrey encourages him to engage with some other women, and he starts talking and ends up going out in the back porch to take a break, and catches Audrey's girlfriend in the embrace of another woman. We soon find out that Savin actually has a thing for Audrey, but doesn't know how to tell her. And in the background of all of this stuff happening, we find out that there are actual werewolves in Mont, Pellier, and they are not happy with the fact that somebody's dressing up as a werewolf and possibly exposing them, getting his picture taken. So soon the next full moon arrives. Savin does his normal routine, but this time during his escape, he is confronted by two actual werewolves. He manages to knock one of the werewolves from the roof, breaking the werewolf's back and causing him to turn back into his natural form, which, very much like Savin, looks exactly the same as he did before transforming into a werewolf. So later, the other werewolf shows up at Savin's apartment and warns him that he must leave town before the next full moon and never return to Montpellier. That's all I'm going to tell you about this book, because I want you guys to read it. It is so much fun. This book is equal parts lycanthropy, fake lycanthropy, comedy, drama, and romance, and a little bit of splash of jewel thievery thrown in just for fun.
Craig, you're costing me money, buddy.
It's so good. And this guy has quite these books are about, 40 pages, not a lot of dialogue. They don't take long to read. He's got probably 15 of these little trades out. I plan on buying every one of them.
It looks amazing, which I haven't read much of Jason's work. I'm familiar with him just because I'm kind of a Fanta fanatic. I just haven't gotten into his work, but
yeah.
What makes my heart happy? Well, number one, going back to Matt's thing, Matt correctly pronounced bona fide, and that made me all tingly in my special places. But also making my heart happy today is the fact that this is the second week in a row you've kind of spoken on one of these almost like comic strip-esque books.
Yeah.
And that I just genuinely love. And so that just gives me all kinds of joy, because you look in and you see all of these different strip things that don't get spoken of with on a regular basis. Last week I made the allusion to the artist looking a lot like the Felix the Cat work. Now
Felix the Cat, yeah.
Yeah, I can't place what this reminds me of, but it's...
Yeah, I couldn't either, but it's very comic strip feel.
Mm-hmm. But it looks so
You know,
familiar.
I couldn't place it either. Same thing. It was like, hey, this looks like somebody I should know,
Mm-hmm.
but it was just maybe a little bit like Animaniacs.
Yeah, a little bit with more of almost a
Looked kind of like Doonesbury to me.
yeah.
Yeah, Doonesbury. Yeah, that's a good one. It just it just a fun little read. Like I said, it probably took me 15-20 minutes to read this issue. There's so much little comedic notes that happen in this thing that you just kind of you laugh, you can see where it's going with his love for Audrey, and that she is not interested because of her sexuality. So there's a lot of things that are going on in this book, and in the background there just happens to be werewolves.
This is awesome. Like this just got put in the cart, so to speak.
Yeah, it's good. You'll enjoy it.
Just like I said, costing me money.
Well, that's what we try to do here: get people to read comics,
and it works. It really does. So one thing that you said is, and it kind of segues into the book that I was going to talk about, is this almost deceptively childlike vibe
yeah.
that this book has, and so kind of what you were speaking to. I've been going back to my bookshelf and either rereading stuff that I thought were incredibly complex the first time, and that I wanted to kind of revisit, or things that I don't really feel like I gave enough attention to, even if they weren't sufficiently, like they weren't super complex. And so I grabbed a book off my shelf that was actually, it was, I think I listed it as my favorite OGN of last year, and that's Pittsburgh by Frank Santoro. I think I remember telling you guys a little bit about this. I'm very interested personally in how comics work to tell memoir. How it's kind of the medium of comics is kind of uniquely suited to go back and really show the reflections of somebody and how they're viewing history through a modern lens. Because comics has this almost not necessarily unique ability, but it's almost singular ability to tell two narratives at the same time, because you've got the narrative that's being spoken through the text, and then you can kind of show the narrative that's being spoken through the visuals, the art, or the subtext of the art. And that's a lot of what this book does. Frank Santoro he's a gentleman who grew up in Pittsburgh. Just I would say he spent most of his childhood in the 70s. He was born in the 60s. His mother was an immigrant from Scotland. His father was a Vietnam vet. And when he sat down to start writing the story of Pittsburgh, what he thought he was doing was writing a story to entertain his mother while she was growing older. She was dealing with some dementia, maybe some Alzheimer's. And he thought when he set out to do this project that he was writing a story to keep her entertained while she got into her golden years. And what he ended up doing was writing a story to keep him entertained while he watched his mother go into her golden years, to keep him sane, to keep him from breaking, but also to write down his legacy. I know, Craig, like you're very big into family genealogy and to family records, and that's a lot of what he is doing in this book. Starts off by explaining kind of who he is and who his parents were. They were high school sweethearts. Again, his mother was brought over from post World War II. She was brought over from Scotland, and she was a Protestant, and she moved into a heavily Catholic neighborhood where she met Frank's dad, who he ended up joining the military going into Vietnam because he felt, for whatever reason, that signing up himself would be better than getting drafted. Like there was a kind of a personal motivation there. Like, no, I'm not going to let these people tell me I have to go. I'm going to beat them to the punch, and I'm going to go on my own. And so he did. And this is almost Frank Santoro's story of how he never came to be. His parents were largely against their being together for whatever reason. His maternal grandmother watched her daughter, Frank's mom, sit around waiting on this Joe to get back from Vietnam, who may not be coming back for years. Watched her, again, a very quote unquote of the time mindset. Watched her daughter not getting married into her 20s. Losing. I hate to think of it this way, but it's the way people did think about it at the time. Losing her curb appeal as a woman, and again, that's not my perspective. That's just kind of an of the time view of what people were supposed to do back then. Of course, Frank's dad does come home, and they do get married. They break the mold, and they last for a while. The marriage goes on, and they have children. They get together, and they start living their lives. But Frank's mom develops a drinking habit that she kind of is keeping secret. She's hiding it. Frank's dad is dealing with uh, some PTSD, dealing with some aspects of the war. Call it shell shock, whatever, what have you. Some things that he's bottled up and is refusing to get treated. He's not like he's drowning it, while his wife is secretly drinking. And so you might imagine this leads to a culmination of unhappiness. And his parents split up, and they're split up for, they split up around the time I think that Frank was a teenager, but they don't speak to each other for 20 years. And Frank is caught in the middle of that pool, and he is, the part of the story is him explaining how his parents' inability to have any relationship with each other and to use him as a middleman it breaks his heart. It pulls him in both directions because he loves both of these people, but he's very cognizant of their faults as adults and as humans, as parents, at an early age. Interestingly enough, his parents both go into the medical profession, and they start working at the same hospital well into Frank's 40s. And so he's watching, at one point in time, he watches his mother walk into the hospital right past his father, and they don't acknowledge one another. But these are both people that would move heaven and earth for him. They both are people who strive to be good parents. The story it's heartfelt. On some levels, it's heartbreaking. It's wonderful to look into the life. It's not setting out to be like, it's not trying to be a soap opera. It's not trying to grab you by the emotions and shake you. It's a genuine tale of this man's life. And as somebody who has, I don't know if I've told you guys about this. In college, in my undergrad, I interned for a small press publisher that was based out of Pittsburgh. It's called Braddock Avenue Books. A large portion of this story is set in and around Braddock Avenue, so I kind of have this weird tangential connection to that world, and the quote unquote Pittsburghness of it all. They do a great job. Frank does a wonderful job, and of course he's steeped in it throughout most of his life, of getting out those kind of unique Pittsburghisms, the colloquialisms that are unique and only found in Pittsburgh. People saying yins guys, Y-I-N-Z instead of use guys. Those things are just blatantly Pittsburgh that you only get there. And this book is full of it. It also deals really well with the fact that his godfather was a black man, and this is post 60s, that era where he grew up a white kid going into a black family, and watching how their lives and their struggles was different than his own, even though he had his own fair amount of stuff, and he recognizes how his life is not easy. Frank's life is not, but there are other difficulties that his family of color face that he doesn't. And it's not preachy about it. It just notes it. It's realizing what happens and what's going on. The pull for this book, the kind of the core thing for me, and what I just absolutely fell in love with it, is the art. And this is where I say, Craig, earlier you left me the perfect segue to talk about this book, because the art it's deceptively simple. There is a quote that is attributed to Picasso, and it said, "It took me 4 years to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime to paint like a child." And that's a lot of what Frank is doing here. The art in this book is incredibly bright. There are a lot of just primary and secondary base colors, lots of pinks, lots of yellows, lots of bright blues, almost any color that you could pull out of one of those 12 color Crayola marker packs, or just a simple pack of crayons. And when you look at it, it is very it's meant to look like something that you walk into a parent's house and you see their kids doodle on the refrigerator, right? Like, it's like the buildings are all outlined in crayon, and there's all these kind of cool, funky, childlike colors. But when you step back and you start to study it a little bit, you realize the amount of craft and the amount of detail that he's put into this world, that he has, like, this is not simply somebody who, quote unquote, can't drawing. This is somebody who is incredibly adept at landscapes and perspective and knows like what detail can be left out and what detail can be left in. And he's trying to show you what he saw as a child through the lens of an adult. Like it's trying to translate those childlike perspectives and the childlike views as an adult who understands now the way the world works. And so you see the little nuances of things. And one of the neat things that he does, because this is kind of an indie craft DIY type book, he draws his landscapes, he draws his buildings, and he draws exactly what he sees and what he remembers as a child. Then he goes back and he'll, on a separate piece of paper, he would have drawn a figure or something happening, and he goes back and he tapes it, and you can still see the tape that he's photocopied or Xeroxed or whatever into the print book where he's put it in. And that's because those are things that he's found out as an adult that he doesn't remember as a child, that he knows now from his adult perspective would have happened or had been there. And he's taped that in to kind of fill in the holes of the narrative of his own story. And to me, that's just genius. Like that is, like, again, we say it all the time, anybody can make a comic. You know, sit down with a piece of paper and literally some crayons or a marker or a pencil. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be, you can go back and revisit it later. You can fix things. He's doing that, and he's showing you how it can be done. He just happens to be incredibly adept at it, and incredibly good at what he's doing. And I fell in love with this book. Like, it hit all my sweet spots. And it's published by a company called NYRC. And I'm sure anybody who is familiar with that is probably rolling their eyes at me, like, how do you not know this thing? But I'm not familiar with it myself. And as I'm sitting here, I have no idea where the actual copyright page is in the book. It's in there somewhere. It's got to be, but I haven't looked at it. But it's one of those things. I actually found this copy after I heard about it, because it was on the short list for some awards. I found it at Barnes and Noble, and I'm sure you can order it off Amazon.
Awesome.
Or you can have whoever order it for you, and have it shipped right to your doorstep. But it's a fun experience. And in a world where I think people try to be too perfect, or they try to be too flashy, or they try to put out this perfect film of what life is and what life was, Frank Santoro takes a completely different take. And he's not afraid to show you all the bumps and the bruises. He's not afraid to color outside the lines, and give you kind of this really, it's not surrealism, but it borderlines on childlike impressionism of the world that exists only in the memory of adults on some level. So I really loved it. I can't wait to read some more of his work.
I think a lot of those same qualities are in 1995's Witchblade #1.
I love that you love those.
Go ahead.
I love that you love that style, and that, that you go out and find these books that are unique to read. It opens up my reading library quite a bit, listening to you talk about these books.
I love the medium, and I think that's, and I know we all do, but I think that is, and including Bill on this one, I think that's what separates. And this is not a knock by any means, but I think there are two types of comics readers. There are comics readers who love the stories and the continuities and the world, and then there are comic readers who love the medium, who love the capabilities of the medium and the way that it can work in a way that nothing else, not even film, can. And then the third set is, again, all of us who love both, who can find value and merit in everything. But even the quiet moments. I'm at a weird stage in life to where realism is more interesting to me, and like real life stories is more interesting to me than anything else. And I think that's largely because, from my perspective, we're living in a cartoon world, and now the stuff that feels more real is being delivered in fiction than what's actually real in real life. And so I've kind of backed off of superheroes, even though I'm still reading a ton of them, right? Like I love them, but it's like I'm turning to these really smart perspectives on on life to teach me things and to pull me through.
See, it's interesting because I've gone the completely different route in that my independent intake is very low at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I view my excursions into one of the big two universes as the escape that I need.
And that's fair as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that now, again, there are caveats. My favorite graphic novel of, across the board last year was a Fantagraphics book,
Mm-hmm.
A Spanish writer and artist, Paco Roca, book called The House.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely suggest that you seek that out. But for me, and I guess there is that, and it's interesting because this seems to be the terrain that the book that you talk about treads on, is that the appeal of something from your past.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me right now, why it has been so superhero heavy is I don't like the world we're living in, and
right.
The escape this is my necessary escape. I can watch. I'm a news junkie. I can have MSNBC on 24/7. Doesn't bother me. But when there is the opportunity to go into comic books, more and more, especially over the past 3 years, it has been superhero escapism.
And both of those things are fair ways to look at it.
Yep.
I think it's there, like you said, it's kind of a split, because we live in such a weird spot right now. The world it's very real, but it's also very it feels like we're living in a reality show. It feels like we're scripted in fake bullshit that somebody's trying to tell me is real life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think either way you go with that, we're in this strange spot in the middle to where you can either go back to these memoirs of real life that talk. It's not even nostalgia, but they talk about things which should be what we're worried about, mental health and family and trying to figure out the humanity of it all. Or you go into superheroes, which deal with those same things but with lots of punching, and Immortal Hulk is another one of those that deals into the psychology of man right now that I'm fascinated by. And so I think either way you go, you're getting you can either go super super real or you can go super super cheesy, and either way it's a good escape from life right now.
For real.
So
real.
I'm just happy
anything that is not the news right now.
Right. I'm just happy we have a medium like comics in this world that we get to read, and that even when we're not getting new stuff, there's still a ton of stuff out there to either revisit or check out. And so
one of my biggest frustrations with, I call them, the angry old men who are actually younger than I am, when it comes to comic book fans, is we've never been at a time where there are more choices, ever.
Right.
That's right.
Even with publishing booms in the 40s and the 90s, we've never been at a time where there's literally something for everybody. And, quarantine issues aside, literally something new for everybody. It just means that you have to do a little more legwork than usual. And that frustrates me because there are people I know that are like, oh, comics aren't for me anymore. It's like, yes, they are. You just have to do some legwork to find them.
Right.
And
that's absolutely correct. There's something out there for you, no matter what your belief, what your worldview is. There's something out there for you. We may want to burn some of that stuff. But, we're not Nazi book burners, so we're not going to do that. But
it's just, and Bill, you said you have to do a little bit of legwork. Everybody's got Google though, and that's what's so bizarre.
Right.
About this, the quote unquote, "there's nothing for me," because go to Google. Like, what do you want? Type it in. Ask Alexa. She's already like our houses and phones are wiretapped. Just fucking ask the computer in your pocket. It'll pull something up for you real quick. Like you don't have to do a lot there. It's like I want angry straight white comics with big titty women and that talk about how I'm the real victim here. That's there. You can find that. You want uber queer, hypersexed porn. It's there, and you can type in those exact keywords. I know. I'm not going to tell you how I know, but I know. So,
it was research.
It was billable hours. No, but it's bizarre to me.
You were talking about you were talking about the world today, and Justin Jordan made a comment earlier, either yesterday or today, about how it has gotten so bizarre that they've made it so crazy that you can actually not write a villain that's wrong anymore. No one can ever say, well, this would never happen.
Right.
There is always some level of, oh, well, yeah, that happened now.
Well, because there's always something to read, and like you said, there's just a bunch of weirdness out in the world, and it's readily available. The way we've kind of been closing out our show is because we can't tell you what to go pick up next week because, till the, like what we talked about earlier, there's not a large amount of new stuff coming out now. There is, several creators are finding ways to put out new and recent stuff. Brubaker put out a new series on a platform last year. I shared it to our Facebook page. But what we've kind of been doing to close out the show is just telling the listeners, telling folks at home a book that you can go either check out on Comixology, or you can order it from Amazon, have it primed to your front doorstep, or if your comic shop is still open, there's a good chance that they'll have it in stock, and maybe they can do a curbside pickup for you to revisit. And these are things they could have been out since the 40s. We've had people talk about, I think both Matt and Craig have talked about older stuff to go back and check out. Or they could have been stuff that came out earlier in the year that's still readily available. Doesn't matter. But there's lots of stuff to read. And so I picked up from my local comic shop this past week a book that it's an entire series that I am going to slap myself in the hand for not having read prior, because I should have, because everything about it is exciting to me. It's a crime book. It's a little bit of a sci-fi book. It's written and drawn by a man who I hold dear to my heart in the comics world, and that is Mind Management, Mind MGMT, by Mr. Matt Kent. I have been picking up the comic shop that we shop at has been setting aside the hardcovers for me, and I've been picking up one a week. And this is volume 1, The Manager, with a foreword by the great Damon Lindelof. If you haven't read Mind Management and you like weird sci-fi crime stories, this book is for you, and I think you would do well to go pick it up and commit it to memory, because it's awesome. As somebody who's never read this before and is just now diving in, it's so good. It's ridiculous.
For sure. I'm picking up a little book. Well, I actually picked it up last week, and I don't know if I'll get it read this week or not, but it's one that, again, I'm negligent not having read it, but that's Mouse by Art Spiegelman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I picked it up, and I'm going to get it read.
That's one of the books that I am of the opinion no bookshelf is complete without.
Yeah, I've always been of the opinion that's mandatory reading.
Yeah.
Yep, it will get read.
What you got for us next week, Bill?
You okayed a non-comic book.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk about that, but there is some comic content I want to talk about. Though there is no visual for this, in honor of the people I am on the phone with, I have a T-shirt on of one of your favorite sons, Johnny Cash. And the book that I'm going to recommend is Sam Phillips, The Man Who Invented Rock and Roll by Peter Guralnick. Peter Guralnick wrote what I think are the definitive biographies of Elvis Presley and Sam Cooke.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a 2015 book where he applies the same attention to detail and passion to Sam Phillips, who was the founder of Sun Records, but also was one of the founders of Holiday Inn. And it's really a fun but dense read, and a character that I don't think we can replicate. I don't think you can have another Sam Phillips, who was, I think, certifiably insane, but that so much goodness came out of that insanity that. Like I said, I just don't think we'll see his likes again, and a book that celebrates it in such a passionate and fun way. So that's my recommendation. 2015 book, and probably find it fairly cheap. And in terms of comics, this is something that's going to be a little bit proactive for me, because I mentioned on the call that there are particular holes I have in my comic reading. I mentioned the Top Cow books, Judge Dredd certainly is, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There's a Hellboy. There's a lot of holes in there. I have basic understandings. I've read something, but not too much. And one hole certainly is the world of Metal Hurlant, heavy metal. And if you go on Comixology right now, there is a huge sale from Humanoids, which is the heavy metal, actually the Metal Hurlant publisher. So for 99 cents, you can get books by Jodorowsky and Mobius. I'm picking up the Barbarella, the fairly recent translation by Kelly Sue DeConnick of the original 64 and 74 graphic novels.
Nice.
There's just a lot here for people. And again, as I mentioned, substantial discounts of about 91% on some of the books. So,
wow. Nice.
That is my prospective comic tip of the hat.
Nice.
I can actively feel Matt falling in love with Bill.
All of these were all good choices. Yes.
Well, Matt, what do you got?
Well, in keeping with my theme, I'm going to stay in the mid-90s, and I'm going to revisit the landmark event that was 1994's Lady Death limited edition, issues 1 through 3 by Brian Pulido and Stephen Hughes.
I have that one as well.
Have you read it?
I have some Lady Death, yeah.
I have not
what the
read
hell
it.
I have, yeah.
Oh, I've got a lot of Lady Death. I've got the gold foil covers, the silver foil covers. I've got the blank covers. I've got the swimsuit edition Lady Death.
Well, look at you.
Hey, at least I admit it.
We kind of had this conversation when we had Wendy on. Lady Death is that's like Bill said, it's one of those holes in my reading. So Matt, I'm gonna need you to curate me a reading list that will turn me into a fiend.
I would say that Lady Death is mid 80s to early 90s thrash metal brought to comic book form.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. It's good stuff. Well, guys, is there anything else that we need to cover? Any ground we haven't covered yet? We got things we need to talk about? No? Going once, going twice?
I don't think so.
We could talk about the Witchblade more.
I was wondering, are you guys familiar with the Witchblade soundtrack? Okay.
I am not.
In 1998, there was a soundtrack for the comic books, and it was put together by Kate Belland of Babes in Toyland, and who's that? The lesser guy, Ogilvy from Skinny Puppy. And,
oh, damn.
Yeah, and there's a lot of covers on there. There's like this really intense cover of the Eagles' Witchy Woman. Peter Steele from Typo Negative is a vocalist on one of the tracks, and the Melvins are involved, and like all the regular industrial names you'd always see on a 90s album like Chris Verona. And it came out on DreamWorks, and it was actually intended as a soundtrack for reading along to the comic.
Wow.
So
wow.
to try to find that, yeah.
Reading along with industrial metal. Oh my God.
Is that the best soundtrack for a thing that isn't The Crow? Because it sounds like it might be.
I don't know. I have such a soft spot for The Crow.
That's my favorite soundtrack of like any
Of anything?
films. Yeah, no, anything.
Oh, okay.
That's put together. That's not like original scores, but it's just music to accompany a film or a television thing. The Crow, like hands down, is my favorite.
So you've forgotten about the Spawn movie soundtrack then?
Nope, I didn't forget about it. It exists, and it's not bad. Like it's just not The Crow. So
it's bad.
My soundtrack like that, believe it or not, is Queen of the Damned.
Queen of the Damned's got a really good soundtrack. Lots of Korn.
I don't like the movie, but yeah, I like the soundtrack.
Thirded. I'm assuming there was a second there. Well, everybody.
So funny. It's like now I'm trying to find the Spawn, the Spawn soundtrack here.
Don't do
so
that.
And remember, if there's anything other than Trip Like I Do on it.
Yeah, there's a lot on it.
If I remember right, there was some Portishead on there too. Anyway, if you folks listening at home have enjoyed this, the last, I don't know, we're running on almost 2 hours now, of just really fun comics banter, then you know where you can find more of it at, and we want you to find more of it at. It's at our Facebook page. If you go to that little search bar, you type in Southern Fried Geekery Podcast, we'll pop up, you join the group. You got to answer like 2 questions, but it's something stupid like, who's your favorite character and why is it the Hulk or something like that. We just let you right in. You get to conversate with great people like Bill. Bill's on there all the time. He would love to have you come and tell him all about the musics that you're listening to, I'm sure, or to strike up a conversation. And look, like having the wealth of his knowledge at my fingertips has been one of the best tools of like I've had since like 2016. Having Bill in my little digital pocket's been an amazing benefit to me. So you can get some of that for yourself. You can also come see images or panels of stuff that we've been reading on our Instagram page, or you can tweet at us. We're at SFG Podcast on both Instagram and Twitter. We'd love to hear from you on there. If you got any questions, comments, concerns, if you're a person trying to get your own comic put out into the world and you are curious, maybe you want us to talk about on the show, we've done so before. We'll gladly do it again. You can shoot us an email, southernfriedgeekery@gmail.com.
Yeah.
And we'll do it. I'm not going to spill the beans, but I'm going to plant a seed. Next week, we have got a person coming on that you have heard us gush about many times on this show. We've spoken about his work a plethora of times, and we're really excited about it. See if you can figure out who that is on your own. If you want my Cash App number, I might. You can pay me to tell you, but I'm not saying I will. But
Will's Protasio?
Nah, not. Sad day, but no. No, this is a creator that, like I said, I'm really excited to get to talk to. So, Bill, I want to thank you again, as always, for being such a great friend and just being so fun to talk to. Do everybody, including myself, a favor and tell them where they can find more of you at.
Okay, well, you can find the Comic Book Bears on the Twitter and the Tumblr and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. You can find the Facebook page as Comic Book Bears Podcast. You can download us through iTunes. You can listen to us through Stitcher Radio, and we still come through on a couple of other podcasting platforms. And if you want to write to us, do so at comicbookbears@gmail.com.
Nice. Thanks, Bill. We really appreciate you coming on the show.
This is my second time. I love coming on. Thank you for greeting a dude from North Jersey the way you have with the Southern hospitality that you've offered.
Southern hospitality. Come down south and we'll get you some cornbread and beans and taters.
Lay out a spread and treat you right.
Yeah.
That's a pull quote for you. Anyway. If we don't have anything further, stay safe, wash your hands, stay home if you can. It's not time to get out just yet. That time's coming, but your health, the health of your family is vastly more important than anything else. If I can walk around my house looking like a chia pet, you can stay home. Wash your hands again. Do it again. Do it now. Twice. If nothing further, go forth and love some comics.
Woo!
Still a quality Woody.
It's not a Jerry movie.